I am Mark Wittenberg. I'm the Chief Information Officer here at the City of Raleigh. I want to welcome you here today. We have a wonderful panel prepared for you, all about data and data sharing. It is my pleasure to I'm going to introduce the moderator, who is Jim Alberque. He's like our data guru. There's no title needed, but Jim is really instrumental in pushing our innovation, our GIS, our data analytics forward for the City of Raleigh. Been with the city for about 10 years, is that correct, Jim? And without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Again, my name's Jim Alberque. I'm lucky enough to work on the City of Raleigh team, work with some really great folks, and that was a great keynote this morning. And I think a lot of those things will end up pulling on through this panel. So I wanted to kind of let my esteemed panelists kind of introduce themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura first.
Good morning. My name is Laura Rogers. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Practice in the Secure Computing Institute of the Computer Science Department at NC State University. My job is working with industry, making sure that I am understanding what industry needs are in terms of cyber and translating that into curriculum, outreach events, everything like that. A perfect example is I went to a conference 6 months ago or so, and I found out that 45% of the job openings in cybersecurity include a GRC, Governance, Risk, and Compliance component. So I came back and said, hey, we got to start teaching this, which is what I do. And so, of course, I am now teaching that. But that's how we keep up with the latest and greatest in cybersecurity.
Thanks, Laura. Next, Robert.
Can you hear me? Wonderful. Thank you. Robert Maxwell, TGT Solutions. I lead TGT, and our focus is on using technology to help economic development activity, fundamentally. We're using technology to help cities become smarter. We're using technology to empower citizens. We're using technology to help build communities. Anytime there is a community, an economic group, a city that wants to do better, we like to have the conversation because we've got lots of experience in the area.
Awesome, thank you. So again, as Mark mentioned, we're talking a lot about data sharing, picking up on a lot of what was discussed during the keynote about creating a smart region and some of the things that we need to think about as we're creating those things here and in other places. I have about a handful of questions, but we're going to open it up for questions at the end. So please, as we're talking, please think of those things. I think one of the things that we had talked about this morning was this is supposed to be a collaborative and learning kind of conference, so we're encouraging you to kind of participate. So I'm going to start first with you, Robert. So our topic today centers around improving data sharing projects in the region. Can you discuss the importance of trust and how to build that trust?
Trust is absolutely essential. And the very first way I think we go about building it is to have a vision of what we're hoping to accomplish and to share that vision. You have to share the vision and you have to share the value in an effort to build the trust. When you go to a community and you say, we want to help you, you have to be able to say, here's our vision of how we can do so. You have to ask for input and you have to be able to show value that has already been achieved. Has cable already been laid? Have you done something for someone in that community before? Are you finding a way to build on what was already established? So building the trust, we believe, starts with sharing the vision and showing the value.
Awesome. Thank you. So Laura, you're next, kind of picking up on the thread of trust and cybersecurity. So trust always comes up with the topic of cybersecurity. What are the most important cybersecurity elements to consider when you're talking about data sharing?
I think if I could just piggyback on what my colleague here said about trust, I think we have a unique opportunity here to either build trust in our community or potentially destroy it. You know, most people nowadays are not terribly trustful of other people, of companies, of government, and we are really at a point where society is going to start crumbling if we're not trusting. And so he's right, we've got to data share, but we've got to make sure that everyone understands that their privacy is absolutely paramount. And so what I typically preach when I'm talking about this kind of thing is that privacy and cybersecurity, those are not departments, they're not people, they're values. And we have to make sure that everyone in the community understands and truly believes that we mean that when we start on these smart cities projects. Because if we do not protect their data, if we not afford them the privacy that we have promised that we would give them, then we will destroy the trust that they have in this organization and consequently in Raleigh and any other city that we're working in. So what I believe is that privacy and cyber have to be intertwined in every single decision that we make, every product that we purchase, everything that we do. We have to evaluate it against security and privacy, because trust is part of the fabric of our society, and we simply cannot afford to lose that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
To piggyback on what Laura said, and I agree with everything Laura has said, part of the initial comment I made about sharing the vision, one has to have conversation. Communication is so key in respect of trust. It's very important when you go to a community to ask what they're thinking, to ask what they want to share. You can't just present, well, in many cases, most places don't even present what they're trying to do. They just do it, which is a huge error because there's a huge backlash after that. So it's about having a conversation, sharing some information, sharing a vision, asking for feedback, getting buy-in. So many times there are groups that do not know what a city is trying to do. The city comes along and the city does something. People go, what did they just do? Why did they do it? One has to share first. One has to receive their feedback. It's so important. We've seen this so many times where you get 4 or 5 key groups in the community. In social media, they call them influencers, but in a community context, I think of organizations. People who will use or consume the technology in question. You get them involved in the conversation. You get them to help to share the message. You get feedback from them, and that helps toward building the trust.
Yeah, we talked a lot about the customer this morning, the resident. And so Laura, I'd love to get your feedback on talking about your building that trust, communicating. What are some mechanisms that you think are good ways to talk about security and privacy with our constituency and residency, making sure that they know, that what we're doing and why we're doing it?
I think you have to, exactly what he was saying is, you've got to get their input. It's all about the voice of the customer. They have to feel some ownership in this process, and you need to let them know what the process is, because they've got to buy into the process. How are we going to vet products and services so that they understand? They may not understand and probably won't understand the technology, but they will understand a process. So you've got to convince them of that, and it's going to take a lot of communication and a lot of listening and conveying that you do care about what they think and about their privacy. As I was watching the Clara thing, I was trying to imagine if I had absolutely zero background in technology, maybe I was new to the country, gosh, how would I feel about that, And I think if you just hit people with something like that, you're going to get backlash. I think we have to understand something that a lot of people don't understand, is that the majority of the populace has zero IT acumen. And I found that out recently just putting something about a password, about how to do passwords in a newsletter for an organization I belong to. And I couldn't believe the comments I got back. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to use the same password for every single account. Really, where have you been? But most of these people they don't understand this stuff. And so the technology is frightening. They don't trust it in general. They've seen all the movies, they've seen the TV shows about how this data has been used against typically marginalized folks in the society. So I think it's going to take a lot of communication. I think, everybody's going to want to go quickly because this is cool stuff. This is a great technology. It's going to be fun to play with. But I think we're going to have to really go very slowly and make sure that we're getting buy-in, as we go.
If I can piggyback on Laura's remark about going slowly, it's important to realize that you have to take whatever time it takes to build trust. You can't say we're going to be doing this for 2 weeks and then after the 2 weeks, off we go. We worked with a community in Pennsylvania earlier this year, and they wanted to do this wonderful project of making sure that they made communication ICT technology available across their entire community. And we said, just a second, have we spoken to the Hispanic community? And we brought the largest Hispanic group of that community into the conversation. You know what the first thing they said was? Nobody's ever spoken to us before. And none of our people use what you are proposing. Everybody just shut up. Because immediately the city's plan sounded good, but nobody in the Hispanic community, which is a growing segment of their community, was interested in what they were doing. It takes time to build trust. You have to communicate. The other comment I'd make to just support something Laura just said was, when you approach the conversation and you do begin to build the trust, you're chatting with them back and forth, be very mindful about privacy concerns. There are a lot of people who are not comfortable giving you data, and when they give it to you, they don't want you using it. So you have to be very mindful of privacy as you work toward building trust. Yes, there are various technological ways to assure people about the fact that their data will be safe with you, but take the time to show them why this is going to work. How are you going to make sure my data doesn't get out there?
And if I could just piggyback off of Robert, I think one of the concerns is, we're all kind of used to, we're seeing cameras everywhere, and, we're kind of getting used to that. But I think the biggest concern now is AI. And none of us truly knows what's going to happen as a result of using AI. And I think that is going to be a big deal when it comes to gaining trust, is how can you prove to me that you're not going to use this data against me or in a way that I don't approve of once AI really takes hold? And I think we're going to have to really flesh that one out, because I don't know that we have an answer for all of that. And so that's another sort of complicating factor when you're looking at trust and privacy and security.
So do you mind if I wanted to add like a city perspective or a public sector perspective, and it's much more for like guidance and advice. So we talked a lot about privacy and security and being very kind of thoughtful and intentional about that. 2, we heard a lot about storytelling and communication and being very intentional about that. In our organization, we are trying to provide the best services we can to our constituents. And the services that they're currently interacting with on the private sector side are frictionless and easy and have AI integration and all of those things. And then they go to maybe consume a city service, and maybe it's not so easy. So I think in the public sector, we're feeling some pressure to move quickly, right? And we're traditionally under-resourced, so it's challenging to do that implementation of policy, communicate, consider cybersecurity, all at the same time. It's a plate spinning activity. Love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think there's a different level of consideration in terms of how your data is used, if it's used by a corporation versus used by the government. Corporations have limited power. And so, and also by law, if they're using your information in a way that you didn't approve of, and, we all see these 9-page privacy docs and we're just like, forget it, I'm going to click yes. But if they were to violate something in there, there's always kind of some legal recourse. But you just don't have the expectation from a corporation that they truly are always going to have your best interests at heart. The thought is that the government should. And so I think that's the differentiator there. And yeah, we do, everybody wants the coolest new thing when it comes to accessing data, information, whatever. But I think we still need to be very careful from the government perspective, because it's just very different to give your information to a corporation than it is to give to a government that could possibly, you're afraid they might use that information against you somehow.
Awesome.
If I may add to what Laura is saying, trust is an extraordinarily valuable commodity. There is a crisis of confidence all around the place in terms of data and what people will do with the data. We all read about hacks all the time. It's much better to go slowly and to do it right and to build confidence and to build trust in your community than it is to be first or be fast and appear to be competitive and not have built the right framework. Many times it's okay for the city to say, we are doing this right. Many times it's okay for the city to say, I think you want us to ensure the security of your data. I think the community gives the city more permission to take a bit more time to do it right. And I think cities should avail themselves of that permission that the citizens will give them. The other comment is, I think, again, it comes back to that sharing the vision. You share the vision of what you're trying to do. Share the vision of the foundational data you want to put in place, the foundational security you're putting in place, the foundational privacy protections you're putting in place. People trust you more. And that's key to the building block for the future.
Awesome. So I wanted to kind of pull on the collaboration and regional collaboration thread. So I'm going to start with you, Laura. How can regions and collaborations leverage effective regional partnerships to enhance overall resiliency of smart cities while also offering a robust cybersecurity kind of posture?
Well, that's quite a question. I'm not really sure I can answer that fully. Obviously, we need data sharing. We see that with, sharing of threat information amongst the different agencies in the federal government. And the reason we do that is so that, if the Department of Defense, is there some, threat actor there, that may go over into the Department of Homeland Security. And we know that that's a problem if when we have those silos. That's one of the reasons we had 9/11, right? We weren't sharing data. So I think that data sharing is very important for safety, for convenience, for efficiency, things like that. What's working over here, might work over here. But again, the first thought, even though efficiency and effectiveness and all of that is super important, we're still going to have to circle back and remember, are we able to secure this data? Because it's going to be data in transit if it's going from this community to that community. How are we protecting it? And one of the things that I really want to hammer home here, and I talk to my students about this, is we have got to push all of these vendors that we're going to buy things from to embed security into their products. I am old enough to remember when we didn't embed quality into our products. We actually thought we could inspect it in. And we can't seem to learn from our mistakes. We did the same thing with safety. That's someone else's problem. I'm an engineer. I'm going to do my engineering. You can worry about safety. You can worry about quality. And you can worry about security. And you can worry about privacy. That doesn't work. In a corporation, though, it's first to market. And that's what, if you've been listening to Jen Easterly harp on this, you know, I'm like, yes, finally, someone is saying we have got to engineer security and privacy into these products. And we have an opportunity with this initiative to push that, because market forces haven't done it. We're not a savvy enough populace to be able to require that of the products and services that we buy. For example, you buy an Alexa for grandma and grandpa, thinking that's going to help them. Well, they don't know that there's a default password. They don't know what a default password is, much less that they've got to change it. So tech companies, and I apologize if I'm offending anyone, have pushed security, privacy, everything else down to those of us who don't know how to do it. So this is a huge opportunity, you know, for Raleigh and the whole state is to insist that the products that we get to go forward with this initiative have privacy and security embedded in them. Another thing that I would recommend is the use of digital twins. I think that if we could have a digital twin for the Raleigh smart cities and digital twins for all the others, then we can actually, when we're testing, we can see what happens before something catastrophic happens in the real world. It'll happen on a digital twin. So that would be the other thing I would suggest.
Mark, I didn't pay her to say that.
I was going to ask.
Jim asked about collaboration. One of the things we're very keen on is collaborative frameworks. Those who are collaborating should have some sort of framework whereby there's an understanding of what it is we're collaborating about and what it is we're trying to get out of this collaboration. In the keynote, Jim Wells spoke about outcomes. It's very important to discuss outcomes. We are leading a project at the moment between a city and the universities in the city. It's a major collaboration to create a particular outcome. We spent probably a year before we quote unquote broke ground on the project, figuring out the collaboration framework. What is it you universities want out of it? What is it that we, the city, want out of it? How are we going to share the data? And these conversations not only built trust, but because there was a framework in terms of understanding what data would be shared, who could use it, and all of those security parameters were built in, we now expect to do the project in about 6 weeks' time. So collaboration, absolutely key. Create the framework up front, then you can have a highway on which you can speed.
Excellent. So this is going to be my last question before we open it up for audience questions. I think we kind of touched on a couple of different questions, but on the cybersecurity side, as well as collaboration, trust, et cetera, what are some advice that you have around foundational things that we can do locally, regionally, other cities and towns around creating these regional collaborative smart city partnerships?
I first of all suggest that you think about the trust component as a separate project. Most people will say, we've got a cable project, an ICT project of some sort, and it's 10 million or whatever, and everybody's focused on that project. Why don't we just have a small project at first, if you will, a precursor to the main project where we build the frameworks we just talked about. Whether you call it a trust framework, a collaborative framework, call it whatever you want. But have a phase up front where you get some of those foundational things in place, well understood, in writing, where you go down to the data element level. Can we share phone numbers? Can we share license numbers? Can we share, in our case, the case I just mentioned, the IDs of the people who are making the inquiries? Can we share data about what inquiries are being made? I mentioned to you before there were different universities. Universities are very competitive. Everybody wants to know, well, how many inquiries did you get? So figure out up front what data you can share. And as I commented earlier, share the vision. You got to share the vision. You also have to show the value, because remember, this data is going to persist 20, 30, 40 years into the future. So you have to show the value in terms of what you're going to do and how you're going to protect it. It's important to have simple things like statements on your website which speak to these things. It may seem simple, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't have a concept of how they're going to use that data 5 years later. Share it with people. People have the questions. Answer the questions. Give them the chance to pose the question. You give yourself the opportunity to answer the question and make sure you've built trust. Trust is not expensive to build in terms of money, but it does take time.
I really like that, starting small, Robert. I think that's really good. It also gives you an opportunity to continuously improve. I'm a big continuous improvement person, process person. That's just how I am. I was born that way, I think. And I'm always looking for ways to improve. And so I think, starting small, looking at the results, communicating the results, getting feedback from the community, and then improving, and then moving out and getting larger. I think that, we need to incorporate continuous improvement, obviously, in everything that we're doing. Particularly, as we know, technology changes so quickly, the threat landscape changes so quickly, we really don't have any choice but to stay on top of it, and that means continuous improvement and making sure that, we're communicating. We're not going to get all this in place and then stop. We have to make sure that we're always polling people. How is it going? What do you think? Do you like this? Do you not? And I think that's super important that we make sure that we're always listening. It's always the voice of the customer.
Jim, can I add? I'll give you another example just to try and make this more tangible for you. For the last 10 years, we have managed an economic collaboration between about 8 different cities that make up a particular county. 8 different cities in a county, and they wanted an economic collaboration. One of the founding collaborative principles was we're going to collect the data and we're going to share the anonymized data. So each city knew, for example, how many businesses was in their particular city, and they knew the detail, but other cities could see the anonymized version of it. You had 39 bakeries. You had 47 general mechanic shops. As a principle of sharing, everybody understood what could be shared and how it could be shared. So over a 10-year period, they've been able to aggregate incredible amounts of data, draw incredible conclusions, and figure out how they can collaborate with each other. If we, for example, using Laura's example, if this university provides a GRC course and the other university provides a more technical course in cybersecurity, we can actually help each other. So they were able to facilitate data interchange through collaboration, but it was anonymized, and anonymized to the point where they could infer valuable insights without compromising privacy, security, or anything like it.
And I think, Tom, you might have heard during the keynote, Tom mentioned a project that we did locally around stormwater, and we kind of went through this this exercise where it seems pretty straightforward, but once you kind of get down to brass tacks, there's a lot of logistics in getting kind of a set of 9, 10, 12, 15 organizations, unique organizations, working together, validating assumptions, making sure that everyone's comfortable with the security posture, the processes on how we're going to share data, et cetera. So we have 15 minutes. I have a whole set more questions, but I'd love to open it up for the audience for questions. Why don't we go John first?
I'd like to ask Robert, what are some of the... Oh, yeah. So, in those places where you've worked with multiple communities, what are the more the internal government challenges, right? I mean, it's one thing to know the data standards and anonymizing the data, but what are some of the challenges they overcame to learn to work together from an institutional standpoint?
So the question related to institutional challenges and how to overcome institutional challenges. The very first thing you have to do is focus on the outcome. In the case of the communities I talked about, the 8 communities understood that because they were right next to a major city, if they didn't do something, that city was going to literally suck all of their talent out, and having sucked the talent out, they would be bankrupt, quite literally. As you have seen on many occasions, it just takes one large employer to leave a region and for that region to be decimated. They knew, in the case of the 8 we were talking about, that I'm talking about, they knew that one of the motor companies was going to be leaving. The writing was on the wall. So they knew they had to build other industries. So the very first thing they did to overcome that potential drag that comes from the many internal discussions that can go on at the governmental level was to realize we have a common objective. We want this region to survive, and we're going to do it by getting economic data and figuring out new industries that we can develop. The other thing they did was to show the value, borrow on some standards that had already been put in place, and they were able to build on those standards. We got them to trust the fact that each municipality could collect its own data and keep it private, but just share the anonymized results. That was a very simple step, but again, it built trust. And having built trust, you can then break down some of the barriers that happen with those internal governmental disputes. The other thing that was very useful was because it was a public-private partnership where the government had to work with private firms, it was easier to get around some of those things that might have been localized. You could externalize it by reminding people, look, this is how we've done it elsewhere. And once people saw models that worked, they bought in a whole lot more easily.
I think I'm next. So, depending on how you define it, we're dealing with like 4 or 5 different generations in the workforce right now. So, Laura, I'm curious from your perspective, how is your student body thinking, they grew up with smartphones in their hands, some of them at this point. How are they approaching and thinking about privacy and security? And then Robert, from your perspective, when you were going into these different cities and communities and counties, have you dealt with challenges in that regard as far as dealing with different generations?
So at NC State, we have the Secure Computing Institute. We have a cybersecurity concentration. And so we're trying to teach the students, to consider security when they're writing code, for example. In the course that I teach, I'm really hammering embedded security, right? But my fear is that these 30 students that I have are going to go out into industry, and the first thing they're going to say is, wait a minute, this isn't secure, and they're not going to have a job. So we have got to decide, collectively, that we want our country to survive. And the only way it's going to do that is if we protect national security. And the only way it's going to do that is if we start really embedding security into our products and services. This isn't going to be market-driven like quality was. You're probably too young, but I can remember the day, when you pick something up and it was like made in Japan and you put it back down. A few years later, they were making the best automobiles on the planet because they listened to W. Edwards Deming. We didn't, right? And so then, all of a sudden, everybody's buying Hondas. I was one of them. And so market drove quality. Right? And so all of a sudden Ford and GM and all these, they had to embed quality into the product. And so we don't really have those kind of market forces because no one knows how to make somebody embed security or privacy in. So how we can pull us all together to do that is national security. We are not going to have a country. I'm a former defense contractor. I know what our adversaries are capable of. We are not going to have a country if we don't get all in the same boat and paddle in the same direction toward security. And one thing that we need to do is we've got to start young. And we've got to get in schools when the kids are young and start teaching them these things. Our adversaries do that. You know, we're just now requiring a computer class to graduate. I mean, really, what year is this? How is that possible? So as parents, if you have children, get in your schools and push it and say, you have got to do better. Our adversaries are doing better, but we are not. And so, you know, I would hope that, you know, all the universities and community colleges are teaching secure by design principles and that we're all pushing that. But at the end of the day, once these kiddos get out into industry, if that's not what industry wants, that's not what they're going to be doing.
One of your questions was about crossing the divide in terms of the age and the interest of the various participants. One of the things we're doing in a project out in Oregon at the moment, older people like face-to-face communication. So we bring them into the local fire hall and have conversations to build that trust and to gain their support. With the younger people in that community, we're using digital channels, Instagram in particular. So having communicated with them in those particular areas, built trust, we then are able to foster that collaboration across the multiple age groups and interest levels in the amount of data. Older people tend to be interested in well, what are you going to do? They're interested very much in the outcome. Younger people are very much more interested in the process. Well, how are we going to do this? So addressing each group's questions has helped us to bridge that gap.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about artificial intelligence and data governance, and there are a number of guidance, regulations, laws in various states that are being formulated. I know OMB just came out with one earlier this week. So as a group that's implementing those kinds of capabilities, you know, how do you think about how to enforce those kinds of regulations, how to provide that governance around data quality, around privacy, around security in the context of artificial intelligence?
Good luck.
I'm not sure I want to answer that. Because I don't really know, like, you know, the answer to that question. I've had a lot of people, former clients of mine say, okay, you know, the executive order on AI just came out. So how is this going to affect compliance, especially the defense contractors I worked with? I'm like, you know what? I don't know. I think it's going to make it more complex, and it is going to require, again, that we be a lot more savvy than we are right now. And that's why I would like to get in, starting with kindergartners on this stuff, because I didn't grow up with a cell phone in my hand. You know, I asked John, I said, where's the written agenda? You know, because I'm older, and that's what I'm used to, and I don't want to look on my phone. But the thing is, you know, we're all going to have to up our game, I think, and that's a tough sell, and it's especially for older folks to really, you know, understand all of this. And so the bottom line is, after all that rambling, is I'm really not sure how to answer your question. I think right now the federal government and all governments are scrambling to try to stay ahead of all of this. And unfortunately, as a country, we kicked the cybersecurity can down the road for so long that now we're sort of in knee-jerk mode. And, you know, we're just cranking out, you know, the 2 new FAR clauses just hit, you know, for review. NIST 800-53, the latest rev just came out, well, a few minutes ago. And so, it's just panic mode. And most of us just can't. I do that kind of stuff for a living. I can't wrap my brain around it. So unfortunately, it's going to require a lot of just due diligence. And we're going to have to bring in experts. I mean, somebody who really, truly gets this stuff. And get them to understand how important it is that we use this new technology, and maybe it can help us with regulation. But again, I always go back to, if we have not convinced everyone that we're not going to use this data improperly, and even if it's anonymized, who's to say that 10 years from now somebody doesn't what is it, de-anonymize it? I mean, and how do we know that AI won't de-anonymize it, right? I mean, we're in a real pickle here, and it's going to take a lot of diversity of thought and a lot of careful consideration before we just move forward quickly with something like that. As Robert was saying, we got the planning stage has to be long and slow.
To answer another aspect of your question, one of the projects, which I haven't yet mentioned, on which we're working, that city has adopted what they called a mixed modality mode. So while it is possible to do many things in the project through AI, they're only going to use AI in one area of the project with chatbots. Comment number one. Comment number two, they're training the chatbot based on the feedback that they're receiving from the community. So they're using AI, but they're using it in a very limited and contained way so that they can say they're using AI, but then they're helping people to become accustomed to it. Remember I mentioned earlier that whole bringing older people into the fire hall because they want to have face-to-face conversations. They're also educating those older people in terms of why you should be comfortable asking this chatbot, remember, it's just a part of the project, asking this chatbot those types of questions, and they've built it so that, or we're going to build it in such a way that you can easily get out of the chatbot and chat to a real person. So it's being done that way so that we can help the younger people, because that's the only way they'll consume it, on their phones and with some AI built in, and to help the older people to come along as well. So it is possible to bridge the gap with respect to the introduction of AI projects, but you've got to plan it very carefully and build the trust.
And something I just wanted to pick up on is education, right? That is something that we can all do. We are all responsible for cybersecurity. So as we know more, we share more. I think that's to put a little bow on it. Collaboration, sharing information, education, I think is a real value to all of us, especially as it relates to new shiny technology that is kind of proliferating the world. So we're out of time. Join me, please. Laura, Robert, really appreciate great insights. Thank you so much.